Hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to part 2 of our 3-part risk advisory webinar series on evolving risks. Last month, we did a session on ERM and board engagement, which you can go to our website and watch now if you'd like. After the webinar, you can catch up to it. It's available, and I don't know how long it'll be available, so you should probably check in soon. I don't know how long we keep those on there. But today, we're going to focus on cybersecurity. And please be sure to join us for our next webinar, November 16th. It's going to focus on, Mac's going to be leading it along with another partner, Walt, from our awesome risk advisory team. And we're going to be focusing on fraud risk mitigation, which during COVID and the aftermath of COVID, we've seen a lot of weird stuff going on. So please check it out. There's some really good information for us to share for you. All right, so today we are focusing on your organization's guide to cybersecurity. All right, so I'm Melissa Musser. I'm Partner Director of Risk and Advisory Services here at GRF CPAs Advisors. I'll be today's session moderator. GRF is an audit and advisory firm located in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and we serve clients all across the United States and even all over the globe. All right, I'd like to start off with some quick housekeeping items and explain what you'll need to do to earn CPE credit. Participants seeking CPE credit must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will appear automatically following the webinar. During our polling questions, you will also receive CPE words, so you'll need to write those down. You'll be asked to provide the CPE words in the survey afterwards in order to receive credit. So please write the words down when they are given to you and hold on to them until you receive your certificate. They will not be provided again. The slide deck and recording from today's discussion will be available on the events page of our website. So again, please be sure to check out the whole series that we're doing. All right, so now's the time to introduce our speakers from our awesome risk advisory team. I'll let you guys go ahead and take it away, starting with Ricardo.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for making me a part of the webinar series in this particular one for cybersecurity. My name is Ricardo Trujillo. I'm one of the partners here at GRF CPAs Advisors as well. And alongside with the great team that we have here, I help everyone go into cybersecurity aspects for our clients and come up with great recommendations and great key takeaways in today's tough environment within cybersecurity as we all know it. I've been honing in into this area for at least the last 10 years of my career at a minimum, having multiple credentials, clearly not as many as Mac, but that's hard to compete right there anyways. But yeah, happy to be here today, and hopefully you all have some key takeaways to take back with your organization. Mac?
Thanks, Ricardo. My name is Mac Lillard. I'm a senior manager with GRF CPAs and Advisors in the Risk and Advisory Services group, primarily leading our internal audit engagements with emphasis in IT and information systems, fraud and forensic auditing. So as Melissa mentioned, I will be presenting at the November 16th fraud mitigation and internal audit presentation. So if there's anything that's top of mind for you all, would love to hear it. We're going to give our information at the end of this, so you'll have my email address. Would love to get any ideas, topics, risk areas, anything that you would like us to cover in that. So please feel free to reach out to me with any ideas or throw that into the chat function. But very excited to be here today to go through your organization's guide to cybersecurity.
Yep, and I'm last but not least, the favorite one. So I'm Darren Hewlem. I am a certified information systems auditor, certified ethical hacker. I don't have as many certs as Mac, but I have a cool one. But yeah, I'm interested in ISO 27001. It's an international security framework. Has lots of fun parts we're going to talk about a little later in the deck, but let's go ahead and get started.
Excellent. Thank you, team. So here we have the agenda that we're going to talk about today. We'll get into some background and introductions at the beginning. Then we'll talk about the current landscape, which is very important. How to monitor your online reputation. Exactly what can people see online? And that's what we have here. What can Google see? Information that's easily accessible by anyone right now, right this second. We'll talk about that. Also, the reputation as a part of the cybersecurity pathway, We'll get into 4 different areas in this reputation pathway to help organizations have a better posture for cybersecurity. And then we'll get into the closing remarks, and then the contact information, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A at the end for us to be able to answer any particular questions that anybody may have. If for some reason we don't get to all the questions, then obviously feel free to email one of us and we'll get back with you with all those hopefully answers to those questions. So next, that gives us a little detail about, as Melissa alluded at the beginning of the presentation, we have had the pleasure to have traveled to many different countries for our clients, which gives us a great perspective and a great aspect of the possible risks that not only lie here in the United States, but also all over the world. So we're able to really hone in and take a look at those different risks and different scenarios that could potentially impact organizations in many different ways. And I've had a chance personally to travel to many of those countries, not quite 100, but definitely a handful of countries that I have been able to travel, which is something I never thought I would do in my entire life. But it's amazing to be able to be part of that and be able to see our clients deliver their mission firsthand. So it's really interesting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa to talk a little bit about our risk advisory tailored solutions.
Oh, thanks, Ricardo. So yeah, we used to be Gelman, Rosenberg, and Friedman. We got our start kind of uniquely, really focusing on international NGOs, and that's where we got to be traveling all over the world, really kind of unlike our peers. And we've really grown and expanded from there, but we still stay true to that international and global mindset. But we have expanded from traditional audit, tax, and bookkeeping. We still do that. We do that really well, but we've expanded to assist our clients, really across their risk universe. And enterprise risk management has really been, it's been around forever, but it's really been a big growing area, especially when it's your board or governance's responsibility for risk oversight. So there's this crazy world we're in and the risks are all over the place. So, how do you really figure out what to focus on and how does that segue into your strategic plan? We really saw that with COVID, really kind of changing organization strategy, and you can see how a risk can influence your strategy and vice versa. And so that's really been great. We've been doing a lot of different work. The last session, you could learn more about it if you wanted to go online. We're also going to be doing a workshop with NC State coming up in November. If you want to work with some other peers, we collaborate with other groups, get people talking together on how they're doing enterprise risk management. So it's really great. And I really love this area of our business. And that obviously segues into internal audit. Once you know what your risks are, you should then go in and look to, audit them. So we do co-sourced. So we help organizations. We come alongside and support their internal audit, or we act as their internal audit, or maybe you don't need a full-blown internal audit and we do what we call just risk reviews over one particular area. That particular area we oftentimes see is sometimes around fraud and forensics, although we do payroll, HR, different types of little single reviews that may need done, or some kind of whistleblower investigation. So tune in, I think next month, Mac's going to cover fraud and forensics. And, I believe we should be probably focusing on the whistleblowers. I do see a lot in that area as well, and some different things to be looking out for, because with COVID, we've seen some things start to slip through the cracks. We've seen some basic, segregation of duties things that, we were kind of surprised to see as people went remote. I feel like the kind of controls kind of went away, and access controls around systems, using shared IDs, different kind of things that you think would be commonplace are really kind of not happening. And we're going to give you some tips and tricks on how to figure that out and iron it all out. Some really kind of basic stuff that you should be doing that might not actually be happening. We're going to really help you there. But today's focus is on cybersecurity. We have an awesome cybersecurity team. We have a suite of amazing technology solutions. And yeah, so this slide kind of goes, it's amazing how much we have. You can go on our website and learn more, but we really can help anywhere from, helping with your policies and procedures to actually doing penetration tests, cybersecurity audits, cybersecurity training. We've been doing a lot with business continuity, disaster recovery, ransomware incident response, you name it. We've been doing it and working through it. And so we're here to help you. And also, wish we could be in person with you and to network with you, but feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. And as Ricardo said, email any of us if you'd like some more information, or email Mac. if you'd like some, specific questions around fraud that you'd like for him to cover at the next session.
And best of all, right, Melissa, this is all customized to the particular client's needs. So it's something that, we go in detail and really customize it to your needs to make it really meaningful and not just an approach that obviously wouldn't make sense for your organization. Something that I just wanted to add.
Oh yeah, it's such a great point. It's highly customizable and affordable, right? So we really focus on that. So current landscape, we go on to the next slide. So I kind of touched on the current landscape a little bit, but things are, it's back in the day, I remember I used to kind of work in IT, and where IT really used to be managed by IT, right? It was like the good old days, we had the server on site. I remember learning about this whole cloud thing. Like I was like, oh yeah, that's not going to happen, but here we are. But what's crazy is like IT doesn't really manage your whole universe anymore, right? So a lot of times we're not always talking to the right people, or we think someone's doing something, but they're not. And there's a lot of misunderstanding as to really what's being done and who's doing what. And so we used to ask for, hey, show us your network diagram. Well, it may just be what IT manages, but now there's these third parties. There's an entire universe. Like say, for example, your accounting system may be in the cloud, not managed by IT at all. Maybe it's, the accounting manager that controls access to those things. How do you know folks aren't sharing passwords or doing some of the basic stuff that IT used to manage? Well, who knows what's actually going on? And if you were to interview IT, hey, how's it going? Are we following these procedures? They say yes. But in reality, that might not be going on. And trust me, we are seeing it happening. So you really got to get a good handle as to what is going on. So that's one area, is just figuring out what is your universe and who has access to what, because how can you protect something if you don't even know who's got access to it or that it even exists, right? So the other thing that's really changing is the technology, right? And what people can see about you and maybe even what you can see about yourself. And so we're going to show you a little bit about, it's called open source threat intelligence, but basically you can run a scan on yourself. You can run a scan on someone else. So yeah, what can Google see? So we used to joke, does Google think you're sexy? I know we were like running with that one, but like, you ever like Googled your name, Googled yourself? Well, there's lots of software that's available, different websites, there's all kinds of different things. This is a customized version that we have that we think is amazing, and it's very affordable, but we want to make you aware that this is out there. So you don't have to use ours, but other folks will be scanning this on you as well. So basically, let's say, for example, if you were to go to get cyber insurance, right? Well, the cyber insurance provider is going to run a scan on you. They do not need to ask you your permission. This is open source information, so people don't need to get your permission to run this information. You'll automatically get put into a bucket, and you may just be denied coverage or put into some high category, and you won't even really know that that's happening. So it's important for you to be able to run this on yourself in order to fix these things so that you can look good, so that for one thing, so that you can get cyber insurance, but for other reasons, you just want to be in good hands. Like, for example, let's say you outsource your IT to a third party and they tell you, oh yeah, everything's great. Well, if you ran the scan, well, wait a minute, there's all these patches, how often are you patching? There's all these lost credentials. Have you disabled those? You'll be like, my website isn't configured correctly. And the outsource provider may say, oh, well, we don't even, manage your website. That's somebody else. And you didn't realize that, or you didn't realize your service level agreement said that they only patch every 30 days. And there's these questions that you never even thought to ask. And so it's really good to be providing some type of independent check on those third-party service providers, or even your own IT. So it's important. We have, right, we do financial statement audits over the controller's office or our bookkeepers. How are we checking to make sure IT is doing what they say? Conversely, before you're going to engage a third party, like maybe a significant third party that you're going to be handing over, possibly they'll have access to sensitive information, why not run a scan on them? Again, these scans are affordable. They can range, I've seen them range from 3,000 to 5,000. I've seen them go up to 10, depending on how big it is, but these are affordable scans to run maybe when you're evaluating a third party before you bring them onto your network. So just this is just a little bit of the background that we're going to be able to get into and go through some different areas for you to be considering as part of your cybersecurity pathway.
And the first one we wanted to go through was just what we refer to as the digital footprint. So on that last slide, when you're looking at that scorecard, it was that little gray box up in the top left corner. And this is really meant to be informational. And this really shows everything that is in scope for the assessment. So if you see this little bar kind of going across the top of the screen there, that kind of identifies everything that's in scope for the assessment. So identifying all of the IP addresses, subdomains, DNS records, social media accounts that are attached to your organization's domain name. This is what is in scope for the scan. So this is everything that this scan is touching on that is available through open source information. So while this is meant to be informational, this has actually helped to kind of identify some low-hanging fruit in regards to some vulnerabilities or deficiencies. So for example, we have seen certain organizations or maybe a department is using a particular website that they spin up, or they're using a particular application that IT is unaware of. So when we actually go through and run this scan, it's identifying a particular subdomain, or it's identifying an application that's in use that had fallen outside of the purview of IT. And I'll follow up on that example a little bit when we talk about credential management, kind of the importance of that. And then we've also found instances in which we run this scan, and this is particularly important, as organizations are digitally transforming, moving things from on-premise servers to the cloud, or leveraging another third party to actually host your accounting system or something like that. We've seen instances in which we run the scan and it actually identifies a server that the organization believed to have been decommissioned. Now, maybe they pulled all of the data off of it, they've scrubbed it appropriately, but it hasn't been taken off the network. So while there's not necessarily data on there, it does provide an access point that is outside of IT's purview, or at least has fallen off their radar because they believe it to be decommissioned. So it provides an open access point. And if anybody's familiar with the Vegas fish tank hack that took place back in, I think it was 2017, a casino in Vegas was able to get hacked because somebody was hiding in a smart thermostat within one of the fish tanks. So they identified it, they performed an assessment, and they determined that nobody was actually in the systems because this thermostat had actually fallen outside of the catalog of assets that could be manipulated. So once their assessment concluded and they didn't find anybody with access to the system, the individual was able to then siphon off data and sell that on the dark web. So again, making sure that you have an up-to-date catalog of all of your physical and all of your IT assets is really important to just making sure that your IT department can appropriately stay on top of all the potential vulnerabilities or deficiencies that could face the organization.
All right, it looks like we have our first polling question. I feel my organization is safe with traditional MFA, that's multi-factor authentication, such as Microsoft Google Authenticator, Duo, RSA. Now, please take a moment to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the first CPE word. The first word is strategy. If you want to receive CPE, please jot this word down because you'll need it for the survey following the webinar. Again, the first CPE word is strategy.
And we picked a long word today.
Interesting. Okay.
All righty. So
I like the no answers.
yeah. So it looks like we're about 44% of people are saying yes, they are secure, and 56 are saying no, they're not. So that goes into patch management grade. So from the scan, we can see if an organization is using updated servers, like Melissa mentioned, are they patching their servers? We see here, you can see Windows Server 2012 R2, Windows Server 2016, and you can see PHP, which is for your web server, for your website or your web application. What we also see sometimes is people running older servers like Windows Server 2008 R2, which is in essence like Windows 7. No one in your IT department is going to allow you to run that on your computer for work just because Microsoft doesn't send out patches anymore. And then at the very bottom, we see a website called Exploit Database. And from here, all I have to do is look up the vulnerability, since all the vulnerabilities are there. As you see over on the left-hand side, the references to NIST. So each vulnerability has a CVE date and the ID number associated with it. You look it up in this database and it'll give you the steps on how to exploit that, either using another technology or just copying and pasting the script and just running it against a vulnerable machine. So hackers have this ability to see this. Insurance providers have the ability to see this. They can say, well, you have a ton of you have 12 vulnerabilities at the very top. So what's the likelihood we're going to have to pay out that insurance policy? Pretty high. Insurance, unfortunately, is in the business of not paying out that and really just keeping it. It's the just in case. It's nice to have it, but it is what it is. Ricardo, you wanted to add anything?
No, I think you did pretty well. You know, clearly this is something that a lot of organizations need to be keeping track of. Especially what I really like about this is the fact that sometimes you get from the IT professionals, the IT department, oh, everything is fine. You don't need to worry about it. It's all good. So this is almost like coming in from the outside and really performing a mini audit, you know, to make sure that whether you use a third-party provider for your IT needs or whether you have it internally done within the organization, this is a really good tool to really understand and really be proactive to make sure that the IT folks are doing what they need to be doing. And it also provides great, you know, information to fix a lot of these issues that come along the way. So it's not only does it find the problem, but it also finds the solution right within the scan. So I love that, you know, myself. And a lot of the IT folks tend to love it as well, because they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was actually there, or that we needed to do this. And it could take you from a D score up to like a B or an A very quickly, just by fixing some of these patch management issues that probably hadn't been fixed or taken care of.
Definitely. And then next we have Hacktivist shares. So Hacktivist is a fun word. So hack and then activist. Everybody knows what an activist is. Everybody's heard of a hacker. So just throw those two together. And the most notable one is anonymous, that you've probably seen do something for like, go after like Westboro Baptist Church or some other organization that does things that people don't, that not everybody is in agreement with. And they pull the data and they see what is going on, and they try to get that out to the public. So they create WikiLeaks, different things like that. Sometimes what we've seen clients' donor lists pop up. Depending on what your organization does, maybe you don't need your donor list popping up on the internet and having everybody see. And the risks, I mean, reputation, what if that's your top donor and they don't agree with what, they don't want their information out there that they've donated to your organization? Could they no longer become a donor, and that could be catastrophic to an organization?
Oh, another area that's really important to think about, and that we actually had coded into the scan that we run, is, you know, looking through your organization's privacy policy that should be on your website. So I urge you, maybe right now, if you wanted to go, if you have multiple screens, go check out your privacy policy. Just read through it. Well, one, hopefully you have one. It's very important, especially if you're collecting information on that, right? Because as a user, I go to your website and I want to see, okay, I'm giving you my email. What are you going to do with it? Or, you know, whatever, however your website processes data or credit cards or all that kind of information. It's very important, and it's publicly facing. So it could definitely cause reputation damage if it's, you know, not accurate. You know, something sometimes we see is, for example, like an attorney will draft up a privacy policy and folks will just slap it onto their website, but they won't operationalize it. So it's really important to read through it and make sure that's actually what your organization is doing. They may say that they encrypt all data, which in reality, they're not encrypting data. So now you're going to get yourself in trouble should something happen and it wasn't encrypted, but then you told the public it was. Or maybe you say something like, we don't share your information with third parties, but yet you do share their information with third parties. So you need to put a caveat in the privacy policy. The privacy policy should actually say what you do with the data. So take a look at it. It's really important. So in our scan, it'll go through that, and it'll also benchmark against local privacy regulation, because there are certain things that really need to be in your privacy policy, especially if you need to comply with GDPR. But there's some other really good stuff that you could be looking at as well that our scan will show. And I don't, Darren, if you wanted to get into the breach index, for example, and this can be really useful when evaluating third parties.
Yeah, so the breach index, so every state has an attorney general where if someone has a data breach, they're supposed to contact the Attorney General, and they kind of post it on a specific site on their main website, and it says, say Montana, we'll use that for example. Every company that has had a breach with Montana is listed on there. So you can see, hey, we're using X, Y, and Z software vendor and they had a breach. Why didn't they tell us? Well, they don't necessarily have to reach out to you specifically and say, hey, we had a breach if your data wasn't lost. They should, so they're being transparent, and you can see, okay, well, what have you done to change that? So we don't go back and do the same thing over and over again. Other good thing about the information disclosure is most of this stuff here is not the IT department. For 9 times out of 10, the IT department does not manage your website. Typically it's marketing or a web developer that's maybe a third party. So you may be thinking, oh, IT's got that covered. And for the most part, I mean, there are certain things that they would cover, but for the most part, their hands are off. They typically don't handle it. If you do have an MSP that does that, you have the one of the unicorns out there that does do it, but for the most part, no. Did you want to add anything else, Melissa? No. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, when you were talking about the breach index, because this software is available for continuous monitoring. So it's not just a one-time scan, but some people are running this software continuously. So for example, if you had a significant third party and there was a breach, you would get notified. So that's the other nice thing about continuous monitoring, whether it's your third parties, yourself, or really your whole universe that you're continuously monitoring. And that's how much this technology has advanced. It sounds like it might be too expensive, but it's not. You could be notified instantaneously of these things. So you don't have to wait for your third party to tell you.
And then the next one is network security. This really comes into play for people that have on-premise servers. So if you don't have on-premise servers, don't close your ears, because it's still important to you, because your stuff in the cloud can still be affected by this. So publicly accessible ports. So like SMB, that's your file share. So maybe like your H, your P, your Q drive, whatever you name them. So where all your files are stored. Sometimes IT departments will open that up so someone can get to it, especially at the start of COVID. They would just open up these ports and people would just connect to it from home, from their home computer, or they're traveling. And this is all without a VPN. Once you put a VPN in the way of that, it secures that traffic. But when you don't have it, anybody has access to it. If you can get to it, John down the street can get to it, and they can do whatever they want to that stuff. Same thing with SQL. The next one is publicly visible remote administration ports. So these are the ones that IT remotes into your computer. RDP, remote desktop, or VNC is another technology that does the same thing. Especially at the start of COVID, a lot of organizations weren't ready to work remotely. They had to work remotely, but they weren't ready. So they would just open this up, or IT opens it up and doesn't go back and close it because John's the VP and he needs access right now. So let's get him access. And unfortunately, that's the same way that an attacker comes in and then drops ransomware on your network. All they have to do is figure out one password. They already have the connection there and they just drop it in there. Anonymous FTP site. If your organization is sharing data on there with an FTP, if you don't turn off the anonymous account, anybody can log in and look at that stuff. The credentials are anonymous and there's no password. You may set up a password for another individual client that says, hey, download the files here, but if anonymous is there, anybody can log in with that if it's not turned off.
And then credential management is always a fun one, because 9 times out of 10, we always end up identifying some set of leak credentials. So this really emphasizes the importance of having an acceptable use policy, as well as a password policy and a policy that includes reference to multi-factor authentication or single sign-on, whatever your organization uses. But essentially what this does as part of the scan is it scans the dark web and the internet for any mention of any leaked credentials associated with your domain name. And these will actually show as plain or hash text. So these plain text passwords, after our scan is complete, we can actually go in and view this password, meaning that it was uploaded into a database somewhere that was compromised and leaked on the internet. So unfortunately, whenever you do go ahead and create a set of user credentials, or you log into an application, those user credentials are saved in a database somewhere. And unfortunately, those databases are regularly compromised. So in the example I had given, when going through the digital footprint of an organization or a particular department, maybe using an application that they don't communicate to IT, we saw this a couple of years ago with Nitro PDF. Nitro PDF is just an online application that has a free tool you can use. It's similar to Adobe PDF, but a lot of some people just like the functionality of it, the end user experience. So if Nitro PDF isn't something that your organization defined as one of the tools that you use, if maybe your organization has an Adobe PDF license, and some people are just using Nitro PDF because of their particular preference, if that's not communicated to IT, when a breach like this happens and Nitro PDF is compromised and all of those user credentials are leaked, IT doesn't know whether or not this actually impacts the organization. So failure to actually communicate the use of that application could result in something like this going unaddressed. So in the event that also a plain text password, or even if a hashed password is leaked, you want to make sure that you have a password policy that is going to result in that password, hopefully getting changed in a timely manner. The great thing about this scan is, as Melissa mentioned, it can be done on an ongoing basis. So as any leaked credentials are identified, you're immediately notified and the individual who's compromised can go in and change their password. Otherwise, you're relying on your password policy to result in that change before somebody can take advantage of it. So a lot of people have password policies. You have to replace or change your password every 90 days, or you have to use a LastPass or a PassVault or whatever it is. Making sure that you're actually implementing those controls is another thing. Implementing lockouts on user IDs in the event that the password expires and they haven't properly updated it, they're not able to then get into their systems or their applications without changing that password. So don't just rely on the end user to comply with the policy. Actually implement those controls within the system to lock people out and force them to change their password. Same thing with multi-factor authentication. Don't just create a policy that says you're required to use it. Force that down on your employees. There are ways that you can implement that within the system, that they have to set up multi-factor before being able to access the accounting system or your VPN or whatever it might be. And then from the internal audit perspective, you would want to audit that, making sure that that policy is up to date, making sure that the practices or the controls implemented or designed within the system reflect the password policy that the organization has developed. And from a third-party perspective, if you are bringing on any kind of outside contractor who's going to have access to systems or data, ensure that they're also complying with the same password policies or parameters that your organization has set, just to make sure that in the event any kind of leaked credentials are leaked onto the dark web, that your organization is able to make sure those user accounts are updated or passwords are updated to provide the smallest amount of risk in terms of those being compromised.
And it also gives you an idea of what people are signing up for with their work email. For example, I see a lot of it's Stitch Fix, or there's sent something that sends perfume or sends clothes or whatnot.
Sure, you've seen a lot of things, Darren.
Yeah,
Eventbrite.
gotta keep it PG.
He's an ethical hacker. He's an ethical hacker. So better than that, you know?
Yeah. So you see all these different things, and then people wonder why they fail these phishing tests that we send out. Well, you're typically, if you're signing up with your work email and you say, well, I'm getting the package from Stitch Fix, well, then it's going to show up in your work email. But if you sign up with your Gmail or Hotmail or whatever you're using, and Stitch Fix comes to your work email and says you have a package at your front door, and you go to or track it, you click on it, well, it's pretty obvious that that's a phishing email, because Stitch Fix has no idea what your email is. So it gives the users an idea of how to protect themselves and make clicking on emails a lot more difficult. And then coming back to MFA is not the all, and as we saw earlier, everybody voted, I think it was like 60% was no, MFA is not the perfect one. They're right. There's a tool called Evilgenics, which actually will steal your MFA token when you log into like Office 365 or Google or pretty much any website through a phishing email. We'll capture that, hold it for about 24 to 48 hours, and then we can replay that and log into any of your accounts with your MFA token. So that's why it's so important to have that end user training, and keeping an eye on what websites you're signing up for is very important, especially with your work email.
I think the end user training is important, and also just obvious. I mean, it should be obvious. This goes back to like basics, is like never share passwords, you know? And I think if I were to ask IT, do you guys share passwords? No, look at the policy. But, you know, it may be a worthy exercise, like an internal audit, to actually interview folks to find out what's really going on internally within the organization, you may be surprised. And, you know, then you would have to make adjustments after that. But just getting really kind of back to the basics and asking folks what they're doing, what applications are they using? Because again, IT is kind of out of the loop. Sorry, Darren. You know, I mean, you guys are kind of there's things going on that, you know, we gotta expand our questioning. We gotta expand our when we do our risk assessment, we have to delve a little bit deeper to find out what's actually going on within the organization so we can truly protect it.
And then next we have brand monitoring. So this is super important. So it looks at the web of trust and people can vote on it depending on the size of your organization and the website, how much traffic you get. People actually vote on it and say, is it safe? Do they take my privacy into account? Things like that. Website optimization. So how quickly is your website loading? Is there quality? Are there going to be issues if I go internationally? Am I still going to be able to get to that? Is it smooth on a cell phone? Obviously, I wouldn't put a ton of money into that, especially if you don't have an unlimited budget, which I don't think anybody does. For the mobile aspect, if it loads, perfect. If it doesn't, then it needs some work. Let you know what your social media profiles are. Sometimes marketing will set up an account with Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and maybe the organization doesn't know, and it comes back to that password policy. Well, who has that password? Is it just marketing? Is there one person in marketing that has it? And what if they leave? How do we get that password, and how do we still get our content onto those platforms that everybody seems to be on now? And then domain safety. Do people think it's safe? And then a little more into brand monitoring. The World Federation of Advertisers came out and said that 40% of customers don't trust traditional advertising anymore. They rely on thoughts and experiences shared by peers. I mean, whenever I go on a vacation, I always look at TripAdvisor to see, okay, here's the rating. What are the worst ones, and why do people rate it the worst one? Is it just the person angry for some reason that day, like the weather was bad? Yes, the hotel can definitely do something about that. And then understanding that two-way communication. If there's an issue, does the organization want to reach out and try to make things better, or at least respond to it, or is the policy just, we're not going to respond on social media? So having that written down so staff knows, do we respond or no, or is it only marketing can respond, and things like that. And then some of these tools are Google Alerts, Brand24, Hootsuite, Brand Mentions, and BuzzSumo. So you can see, like, do we spend our money on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter? Where are people actually talking about our organization? Where can we make the most impact and get our message out there? And then next we have the SSL and TLS Strength. So this is like that lock in the top left corner that makes you feel secure when you go to a website. Obviously, if you see something on the right-hand side when you go to like your banking website, I highly don't recommend putting your password in there. Otherwise, you might as well just give away your money, because that's exactly what you're doing. So there's different levels of encryption, and not to go too crazy about it, but there's changed the names over the years, but pretty much there's different attacks called poodle, drowned, and beast attacks, which really downgrade the security of that encryption, and then lets anybody kind of break that algorithm. And then here we have fraudulent domain. So this is a really fun one. So everybody's gotten an email that says, hey, you need to pay this invoice, and have people pay the invoice, or have people bought those Apple gift cards and tried to send them to somebody. I know multiple people who have done that. The easiest way to do it is if you have an I or an L in your domain name, people switch those out because you can't really tell which one is which on a website. So that's why you have to look at the emails and see who is it coming from. Sometimes people will say, well, it came from Melissa Musser, but it's like a Gmail with random letters just smashed in there. Well, that's great, it came from Melissa, but is that actually her email? So that's what typo squatting is. And then if someone does send you something and you feel like it's malicious, or maybe they popped up a website that looks exactly like yours, and the donation button is going to some random account that's not yours, or you're not your organization's, you can look up the domain, who owns it. Two websites, look up ican.org or who is SC. There's tons of other ones out there. And you can see who the registrar is. So it could be GoDaddy. There's tons out there as well. And there's an abuse contact number and email address. You can say, I have a complaint, and they can actually take down those websites. I mean, obviously the FBI has taken down websites before, but they can't search every single one. So we have to do some of this due diligence on our own. And I think Mac was going to talk about some other stuff in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on that very last bullet point. We included an example here about INGOs in Ukraine, potentially more likely to be targeted right now as a result of the ongoing war. But this is really applicable to any organization that feels as if they may, for whatever reason, whether it's the mission of your organization, whether it's due to the assets you hold or your current cybersecurity posture, if your organization feels that you're in any way going to be targeted, this is really helpful because this will identify those fraudulent domains as they spin up. But this isn't just a tool to actually protect your organization. This is actually really helpful in protecting your donors and your stakeholders, because in the event somebody does spin up a fraudulent domain designed to look like yours, they may actually take that a step forward and begin reaching out to your donor database if they have that information, or your clients, your customers, board members, whoever that may be, trying to request changes in ACH payment, trying to request payment for services. And those are the types of things that you won't identify until that vendor or that individual reaches out to your organization to let you know that, someone is trying to spoof them or trying to confirm some sort of ACH change or whatever it is that the fraudster is trying to present them with. So again, this is just a really helpful tool to not only protect the organization, but to protect your stakeholders in the event that somebody does try to target you or your customer base for whatever reason.
And some things that some organizations do is they buy those other domains that are very similar to yours. Not every organization can do that. It will get expensive. You can't buy every single one. And what like Bank of America I've seen before, they'll send out an email and says, hey, we've seen an uptick in phishing from this type of email. This is what it looks like. So if you hear some from your clients, send out an email that says, hey, this is what we've seen out there that people are trying to do it. Just be vigilant. Look at it. Like our invoices will only come from X, Y, and Z location. If it comes from anywhere else, let us know. And this is our information if you want to contact us with any questions. So having that communication, that two-way communication is really important. And then next we have the Ransomware Index, and this is really important for third-party risk management. So we can see here at the very top is that actual index. So you can see where you are. So this organization we have up here is about 50%. So their risk is pretty high. And the industry average is down pretty low. You can be at the lowest risk possible and still be victim to ransomware. It really takes one user. What this index does, it really shows based upon this scan, all the information on the left-hand side, all these indicators. How does it affect your score? Does it make you more susceptible? And what we've seen from recent attacks from Kaseya, Colonial Pipeline, that these indicators were really high. And obviously they got hacked. Obviously they were probably hacked for a different reason, not just because these indicators were high, but because they had access to systems or they had the financial backing to probably pay the ransomware. But it's still highlighted and identified with us that they were still high risk and it happened to them and they had to pay. So we can look at remote port access. A lot of the stuff that we spoke about earlier is all showing up on there. And it just kind of has an algorithm to calculate how that affects the score and raises your risk.
Yeah, whenever we hear about a ransomware attack, we'll run this again, because you don't need to ask people's permission to run the scan. So we'll run the scan just to see what their ransomware index score would have been, and did they have some vulnerabilities? And they're always in the red. They're almost always in the red when we run the scan. So again, it's just this technology wasn't available several years ago. So just really want to make you guys aware of how easily accessible this is, and it's surprising that folks aren't really using it as much as they should because it's so affordable and it's so eye-opening. All right, so our next polling question, does your organization follow an IT security framework? A, ISO, we have B, NIST, other, no, unsure.
So the other can be like SANS. Oh, I know you have to, I'll let you do the word. That's what everybody's here for.
But again, you want to, okay, let me do the word thing. Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the second CPE word. The second CPE word is domain. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot these words down because you'll need them for the survey following the webinar. Again, the second CPE word is domain. And go ahead, Darren. I was going to say, other can be like the SANS top 20. It can be PCI, DSS, HIPAA. Maybe your organization has something different. I know that NIST has a couple different ones. ISO 27001. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so we have
About 14% of the people are doing ISO, nobody doing NIST, which I'm kind of happy. That's focusing on nonprofits. NIST is a lot of red tape from the government side, and ISO really lets you focus on any size organization, really lets you say, here's my risk assessment. This is why I feel like I need these controls to help protect us. So people are using other ones, which is great also. And then another 14% is no and 50% unsure. So. And then next is the reputation as part of a cybersecurity pathway.
And I'm not going to go too much into this because I want to allow Ricardo some time to really dive into that. But really at a high level, when we try to make things, cybersecurity can be very complex, but if you break it down simply, is my favorite thing to do is to try to make things simple, right? So step one, what is your baseline? So sometimes we hear, you should be doing a risk assessment every year, and that risk assessment is establishing your baseline, right? And so Ricardo's going to talk about how to do that at a high level. And then once you know what your risks are, then you design a cybersecurity program, right? And that can be based off ISO, NIST, or anything like that. You do not need to 100% comply. It needs to be based on your risk assessment, right? And so you build those controls, then you educate your employees or your subcontractors. And then lastly is a cyber audit. Are you keeping up to date? So it's an audit to make sure that what you put in place is actually in place and operating effectively. And I've gotten the question before, we only have so much money. What should we do? Should we do a risk assessment? Should we do a policy benchmark? Should we invest in training? Should we do a cyber audit? And a lot of times folks think, well, the board's like, I want to see a cyber penetration test. I want to see, but that is great and that is good. But you have to have done all the other parts first, right? You don't just jump to a penetration test because cyber is so big and vast. Yes, you could get a report on that one little area, but what about all those other areas? I would want to get assurance over those. So they're all important. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo to talk a little bit more about it.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, let's get a little bit into the details. I love how you obviously framed it, but one of the things as we start here is about the baseline. And what do we mean by the baseline? Is really talking about understanding, what kind of digital and physical assets the organization currently has, taking inventory, and what Mac was saying about this casino getting hacked or being hacked, a few years ago because they didn't realize they had this thermostat that was obviously on the network. So again, understanding, from a risk assessment perspective, what kind of assets the organization has, inventory those assets. And again, that also includes doing an internal and also an external scan, depending on how the organization is operating, and really identifying those assets to understand what are the most important assets that the organization needs to really focus on. Is there a server that really is housing a lot of the critical information, or is it on the cloud, or what kind of also software and applications does the organization have, and who has access to those applications, and where are the passwords stored? Is it in a vault? And all that stuff is going to really help come up with a particular baseline for the organization, which in turn is going to take us to the next step of like, okay, so if we go to the next slide. Now we know, okay, here are the assets, here are the digital applications that the organization has. Now, what would be the most or the best program to really implement, or what framework should the organization follow? And I honestly see a lot of organizations do a combo, taking a little bit of ISO, taking a little bit of NIST, taking a little bit of PCI, DSS, and really honing in and taking those areas and saying, okay, this is pretty much, we're going to make it our own. So organizations come in and really use all of these particular frameworks to be able to develop those policies and procedures to, once again, protect those assets that were identified in the previous step, understanding, okay, here are the assets, now here's the program, and now we can understand how we need to obviously protect those particular assets, because without identifying those assets, organizations are going to be lost. Okay, well, here's all the information that PCI is coming up with, and where do we start? Well, if you don't know what you're going to need to protect, then obviously it's going to be very difficult to really come up with that particular cybersecurity program. And then obviously you want to make those particular policies and procedures very easy to understand. You don't want to leave them up to interpretation, like we say here. Any regular person that's not in the IT, that has any IT background, should be able to understand those policies and procedures and should be able to follow them, of course. Then as we go to the next slide, then obviously all of this needs to be communicated, so then cybersecurity trainings, all the employees, all the staff need to be part of the cybersecurity trainings, need to have these phishing simulations that we can also help with. There's tons of emails. I get them pretty much daily about people trying to steal my information. I recently just got one and I was discussing it with my family saying, look, I just got an email from Apple saying that my Apple ID had been locked, and you looked at the email and it was legitimate from Apple until exactly what Darren and Mike were talking about. You need to go back to that email address, who's sending it, and do they have anything to do with Apple? And that's when you're going to realize, and honestly, has my Apple ID been locked up? I don't remember being locked out. So again, common sense, but you'd be surprised how many people fall for it and start clicking on it and start giving away their information. So sending out those bulletins, really communicating to the staff as much as possible, because the only way that this is going to be circumvented is by training, communication, and letting your team members know as much as possible to be very, very vigilant. Then really the last step on the cybersecurity path over here is really talking about and understanding exactly what Melissa was saying. Well, we go through the penetration testing. Well, that's part of the IT audit, but is a penetration testing really necessary? We have all these devices, we have all these servers, we've inventoried the assets, we've gone through all of that. So then you can really hone in and understand, okay, maybe the scan is sufficient. And then you might be able to go to an IT audit. But again, the IT audit could be very specific, targeted to an area of the high risk. Like we understand the high risk here could potentially be training of employees. So then we hone in on that IT audit to understand, are they properly being trained? Are they getting those phishing emails? Is that happening? Or really it's access. Okay, well, how is the access? How is that being monitored and so on and so forth? Or is it third party? Is the risk more on the third parties? Okay, then let's hone in on the IT audit on those third parties. So really that's why exactly what Melissa was saying, we need to follow that path to understand how do we get the best value at the end of the day, and how do we best protect the organization when it's all said and done, right? Because then when you go in, the organization is going to get insurance, and then they have all this in place, it's going to go a long way to be able to obtain a very less expensive, let's not say cheap or very low cost, a less expensive policy, because as we all know, these are just continuously going up and up and up in price. So with that, I think we'll go to the next polling question. Melissa, unless you want to add something else.
Oh, no, that was great. So polling question 3, is cybersecurity a regular agenda at board meetings? Yes, no, or unsure. Please take a moment to answer while participants are submitting their answers. I'll provide the next CPE word. The CPE word is program. If you want to receive CPE, please jot this word down. You'll need it for the survey following. Again, the word is program. All right, well, 54% said no, 38 yes, and a few are unsure. All right. We can go ahead to the next slide. So if those of you watching today, I just wanted to highlight that, you're not alone if you're not talking about it, but that doesn't mean that cybersecurity shouldn't be talked about, right? And sometimes it's up to you to bring it to their attention, and whatever the role is, saying, this needs to be discussed. And, why is it not being discussed? Some boards are dysfunctional. Come on, let's just be honest, right? But we got to help them along because it's their job to protect the organization. So, and it could also be that they're not of the right composition. They don't understand enough to even ask. So we really need to be bringing it to the table if the discussions are not being had, because they really need to be at the board level. So top risk perspectives, again, we work with NC State. And so this was one of their risks, top risk perspectives for 22. And you can see that cyber is still making the list. Obviously, digital technologies, transformation. I'm sure you're all experiencing some sort of transformation, cyber threats. And then you see down there below, third party, outsourcing, data privacy. So it's still in the top. So the discussion needs to be had. It's hard for me to imagine an organization that doesn't need to be having these conversations at the board level. And, God forbid something happens and you're able to go back through your board minutes and notice that the conversations were never had. I mean, you don't want to be found negligent at your organization. So these conversations need to be had. So this is just another fascinating thing from the same survey, NC State. So they were doing a survey on significant risks, right? So it could be any type of risk. So, but they're surveying folks like, what would you consider to be a significant risk? And board members said, no significant risks that we're aware of. CEOs said there were 13 significant risks. CFOs said 1. And then the CTOs and the CIOs, the chief information officers, said 17 significant risks. So I think what this shows is, one is the need for enterprise risk management, right? And so one of the things that does, you hear, what's the difference between risk management and enterprise risk management? Well, risk management kind of was more focused on, maybe insurance claims or, executing things within a silo of an organization. Enterprise risk management is really connecting those dots and helping people have the same risk language. So when someone says something significant, they're all on the same page and they know. Now, is the board right when you look at the big picture? Is there really nothing that significant? And maybe there are some moderate risks. And maybe the IT folks are just freaking out, who's really correct here? I don't know. And that's where ERM comes in. So you get those likelihood and impact scales, and you really start to say, what would be a catastrophic event for us? Is it systems going down for 7 days, 15 days? It's an important exercise to go through, and we're seeing a lot of folks going through that exercise because this will affect your budgeting. Does your IT department need more funding? So it's really good to consider and think that. Turn it over to Mac to wrap us up.
All right, I know we've got just a few minutes left, so I wanted to leave a couple minutes for Q&A. But just to summarize real quickly what we talked about, there's a lot available in terms of information about your organization that's available online that's easily accessible. So understanding, again, where your weaknesses lie, performing the exercise of cataloging all of your hardware and digital assets is really good part or a good element of just understanding your organization's baseline, performing that initial risk assessment to identify any gaps, weaknesses, anything that hasn't been identified or anything that hasn't been included within any of these assessments in the past. And understanding what your future state looks like. Where do you want to be 1, 2, 3 years from now? And really, what does your budget really support? And understanding what those crown jewels are so that we can appropriately allocate our resources to touch on the most pervasive risk or to address the most critical functions or platforms that support our operations. Cybersecurity and improving upon your IT infrastructure is an ongoing process. Hackers are always spending more time and more money to stay ahead of you, so it's equally as important that you do the same to stay ahead of them. Unfortunately, from the IT perspective, we need to be right 100% of the time, whereas a hacker only needs to be right once in order to compromise your systems. So ensure everybody knows the risks through that proper end user training, through policies, procedures, as well as ongoing phishing simulations if possible. Also through proper board communication and educating the board on those most significant risks, where the organization currently sits in regards to their IT posture, and again, where you're going in the future and what you're doing to mitigate those risks. And lastly, trust but verify. The same way you go through the annual process of performing an audit of your finance and accounting controls, that same concept applies to your IT department. What are you doing, whether you have an in-house IT department, you use a managed service provider, you use an IT consultant, what are you doing to evaluate those controls and ensure that they're being implemented as designed on an annual basis? And again, these assessments can also help as just a way to improve upon your cyber program. So having that independent verification of whatever it is your in-house IT or your outsourced IT is doing on an annual basis is really important for ensuring that, one, controls are properly designed and implemented, but also for ensuring that you're constantly improving in your cyber program. So with that, I think this next slide is just some really great resources that we have available online. This is only a handful of the resources we have available on our website. So if there's anything that's top of mind for you, related to IT, cyber, or really anything in regards to your risk universe, I would definitely recommend you take a look at our website. But here are a few recent articles, blog series, and white papers specifically over cybersecurity and IT. But with that will do it for our presentation today. Thank you everybody so much for joining us. I think we will leave maybe a minute to see if any questions pop up in the chat, but otherwise, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Hope to see you all at the November 16th webinar over fraud and forensic auditing.
Yep, I don't see any questions. So yeah, feel free to email us, contact us on LinkedIn, and be sure to check out our other webinars. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.